Chapter 36 Forced to play the nurse. With trembling hands, Mia carefully laid out all the makeshift tools she'd sterilized on the small table near his leg. The room felt tense as she dreaded removing a bullet from someone's flesh. Her major in school wasn't medicine but journalism, which had nothing to do with removing bullets and sewing wounds. However, with the mix of urgency and the desperation the man before her was using to instruct her, she knew she must not let herself panic and end up killing him by doing it wrong. Why did he even come to her to begin with when he could just go straight to a hospital? Was he trying to hide from the authorities after committing a crime? Was he a criminal? Despite all the thoughts that ran through Mia's head, she still didn't back out from helping him. He had come to her rescue a few times. It was only natural that she repaid him by doing this. Neil turned to the side and instructed her to pour the alcohol on his wound. Mia nodded, and with trembling hands, she did as he said. He slightly winced as the liquor made contact with his wound, but he didn't make a sound. However, she noticed the beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he looked at her with those intense gray eyes of his and instructed her to use the sterilized tweezers to probe out the bullet. Mia picked up the tweezers. Her hand was shaking violently, and she suddenly realized she could no longer will herself to do it. Relax, you're not going to hurt me. The wound is on my side. I would have removed it myself if my eyes could reach it, he assured, as he noticed her hesitation to do as he instructed. Mia nodded and glanced at the assortment of tools before meeting his eyes with nervous tears gleaming in her own eyes. What if I do it wrong and you catch an infection? I don't think. I won't catch any infection if you do as I say. But if you don't get that bullet out of me, I might really be infected. You can do it, he encouraged with a soft, steady voice, something he never did. She nodded and picked up the sterilized tweezers and leaned down to do as he said. Oh, Lord, what am I doing? She murmured while gently probing to find the embedded bullet. His jaw clenched as she probed for the bullet. When she couldn't bring out the bullet, he instructed her to make a small incision with the knife to extract the bullet. The whole time Mia was trying to remove the bullet, she was muttering a prayer as not to kill someone. Fortunately, after she made a small incision, she revealed the lodged, small bullet. She then used the tweezers to grip the bullet. Her movements were a bit clumsy. Neil winced, but he remained as still as possible, gritting his teeth as Mia managed to extract the bullet. Immediately, blood started oozing from the wound. Quickly, Mia poured the alcohol before reaching for the clean cloth he had instructed her to get earlier and pressed it against the injury. Hold this here, she directed, as she used another one of her clean scarves to do a makeshift bandage and wrapped it around his waist. She had to support his body to get the scarf to wrap around him properly, so she leaned over him. However, Neil also turned towards her at the same time she leaned down and, by mistake, his lips brushed against the side of her mouth, making Mia's body stiffen. With her arms still behind his back trying to get the cloth to wrap his wound, she glanced at him in surprise. However, his expression was as blank as ever. Her heart subconsciously increased its pace as she locked eyes with him. Those gray eyes seemed to hold her in place, and looking into them, she couldn't help the sudden sense of familiarity that rushed through her. His expensive cologne mixed with the scent of blood wafted to her nose at their closeness. If you're finished, step away, he softly whispered, bringing her back to reality. And Mia quickly stepped back. She frowned at his rudeness after she had helped do something she could never imagine doing in her whole life. She had never treated a normal wound, not to mention probing for a bullet. You could at least say thank you, she murmured while picking up the tools she'd used to remove the bullet and wrapped them around a cloth, while telling herself she'd take care of them later. Her clothes were also covered in blood and she needed a hot bath to get rid of them, as the sight of blood only brought back the terrifying figments of her strange nightmares. When Mia turned back towards the sofa, Mr. Ice Cube was already trying to stand up. She hurried towards him and tried to support him. What are you doing? I don't think you should be standing up yet. Sit down for a while. She tried to push him back down, but he didn't budge and only stared down at her with his unemotional face. Her head barely even reached his chin, and she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. With that lazily detached tone of his, he said, I need to use your bathroom, and mind you, I am not that weak not to be able to walk. He moved away from her supporting hands. However, when he tried to walk, he almost lost his balance from the dizziness that washed over him, and before he could fall, he grabbed Mia for support, wrapping his arm around her body to support himself. Mia, who was suddenly grabbed by Mr. Ice Cube, froze when he tried to stabilize himself with her body. He was basically hugging her with his arms around her body and his head down in the crook of her neck. He might be immune to her, but she wasn't. His presence was making her heart act funny. She could feel his strong arm tightening around her, and his warm breathing was falling on her neck, tickling her skin. "If you are stable, please move away from me," she murmured softly as she tried to step away from him, but he was holding her tightly. Neil didn't know what was suddenly wrong with his body, but he felt like if he let her go, he would fall. He had been shot before and he had never felt this way after a bullet removal. His head was turning, and he just needed a place to sit or even lay down. He had intended to use her bathroom to clean the bloodstains on his body and get rid of the repulsive smell of iron that always made him want to throw up, but now he found himself unable to walk properly. He just wanted to lay down somewhere. "Help me to your bed," he murmured softly as he felt his legs shaking from the inside. Mia was taken aback by his words. Her bed? What was he going to do on her bed? "What do you want to do on my bed?" she asked in astonishment as she tried to move away from him again, but he still wasn't letting go. "I need a place to lay down, and I can't do that on that small sofa," he said calmly, trying his best not to let all his weight on the slender girl he was using to stabilize himself. She felt so small in his arms, he thought he might break her in two if he released all his weight. Mia's eyes widened. "You don't plan on spending the night in my room and on my bed, do you?" she asked in a surprised whisper. The last thing she wanted was a scandal about a man spending the night in her room. She hadn't asked any questions about how he got shot because of the urgency of the situation, but then she also didn't want to get involved with him if he was some criminal trying to avoid authorities by not going to the hospital. "I don't like the idea of spending my night here as much as you, but my body says otherwise, Harrison." "Now help me to your bed, I need to lay down," he remarked, his voice carrying that tone of command he always had. Mia would have liked to argue with him about staying in her room, but then his weight on her was starting to pull her down, and she realized his body might not be strong enough to leave from where he came from. She silently wrapped her arm around his waist, where she could feel his toned abs against her palm, and helped him to her bed. When he fell back on her bed, he couldn't even bring himself to put his own legs up. He just lay there trying to think of what was wrong with his body. And as if noticing he was unable to raise his legs, the girl bent down and took off his shoes before pulling his long legs on the small bed. Neil hated any act of vulnerability. He had worked and spent countless sleepless nights of his life in the military. He hadn't, for once, after 15 years, relied on someone to help him do anything. And today, as he felt like a piece of dead plant, he couldn't help but feel angry at his vulnerable state. The smell of blood wafted to his nose again, and he suddenly felt the urge to throw up. He hated that iron smell, and he wanted to get rid of it no matter what. Even if he had to ask someone to do it for him, as he couldn't will himself to move out of the bed. "Can you do me a favor and get some water and soap and wipe this blood off my body before I pass out?" he asked, his own small voice sounding foreign to his own ears. Damn it. He hated himself so much for being unable to move. Mia's eyes slightly widened at his request, not to mention how he seemed to be asking politely instead of commanding her to do it for him. However, realizing what he was requesting her to do, she couldn't help but want to refuse. He was asking her to wipe his body, and looking down at his toned, exposed torso, with that ominous snake tattoo that looked like it would swallow her with its wide-open mouth if she dared come close to him. However, seeing his vulnerable state, with his closed eyes and how he was breathing steadily, she couldn't refuse to help him. And instead of refusing as she intended to do, Mia nodded her head as if he could see her, and went into the bathroom to get the things she would need to clean him. Chapter 37: Cleaning his body. When Mia returned to the room, she realized Mr. Ice Cube seemed to have fallen asleep on her bed. Her small room made his big frame stand out, especially since his legs hung off the edge of her bed. With such height, it was a surprise her bed didn't break in two. She walked towards the bed carrying a bowl of warm water and mild soap with a cloth, ready to help the injured man. The snake tattoo on his strong chest caught the light, and his skin looked a bit strangely pale. She couldn't help but think that going to a hospital might have been better than coming to her place. What sort of fight did he even get himself into that got him into such a state? She had seen him fight before, and with such strength and temper, it was no surprise a gun was involved in the fight. Mia placed the water on the table, dampened the cloth, and cautiously approached him. His large presence on her small bed was evident, and as she looked down at him, her gaze involuntarily wandered to his trousers, which hung low on his waist, revealing the V-line of his lower abdomen. His stomach was perfectly flat, and his abs were well defined with no excess fat. He appeared too good-looking to be a professor. His physique and features were enough to put the word model to shame. It seemed as if he had been specially crafted by the heavens. She couldn't find any flaws in his appearance. Mia sighed. How could such an Adonis be in her room and on her bed? And what if this Adonis, who looked like someone out of a mafia movie character, was a wanted criminal who was pretending to be someone he wasn't? Wouldn't that implicate her in his mess if the police found out she had helped him instead of reporting him to the authorities? However, she couldn't even find it in herself to report him. The thought alone didn't sit well with her. As Mia began wiping away the blood on his torso, she was stunned to notice that his tattoos were drawn to cover some scars on his chest and arm. At the upper side of his right arm where the snake eye was inked, there was a scar that looked like a healed gunshot wound. What did he do to get all these scars on his chest and arm? As Mia cautiously continued to wipe the blood on his chest, she felt a mix of nervousness and a sense of familiarity she always felt whenever she looked into his eyes. It was the first time she had touched a man like this. His face looked calm in sleep, but still showed signs of stress with his tense brows and the dark circles under his eyes. She hadn't noticed his face this close before, and now that she did, she wondered if he even sleeps like normal people with such dark circles under his eyes. Mia couldn't help but also notice a wound on the side of his head as she tried to wipe a dried blood spot on his forehead. Was he hit on the head? Who was this man she allowed into her room? Was he really a professor or a criminal? There had been cases in their country where criminals, like the Da Kroll members, had pretended to take a fake identity to be able to do their illegal business without being caught. It had happened many times before. Some pretended to be school principals and some teachers and even professors. What if this man was one of them? What if he was planning to place a bomb somewhere after their operation to clean their tracks like all the members of the Da Kroll do? Was he being a substitute to bomb Ivy Grove Institute? Mia chuckled nervously at the train of her crazy thoughts. That was impossible. He couldn't be one of the Da Kroll men. He hadn't done anything suspicious for her to link him with them, but then he had asked her about the information Diane stole. He could be. All right, that was enough. Her journalist instincts were making her come up with crazy assumptions. Wanting to put an end to these thoughts, Mia cleared her mind and stood up after making sure she had wiped away every trace of blood from his body. She then glanced down at his peacefully sleeping figure. Seeing how harmless and non-threatening he appeared while asleep, she decided to dismiss her suspicions. She attempted to pull the blanket from under his body to cover him, but he was too heavy to move. After several unsuccessful attempts, Mia gave up and only managed to cover his torso with the edge of the blanket. After she cleaned up everything she'd used to take care of him, and also cleaned all the traces of blood from her room, Mia felt completely drained. All she wanted was a place to lay her exhausted body and sleep. However, she had no bed because Mr. Ice Cube was now on the only one she had. She stretched and yawned while glaring at his sleeping form. You better have a good reason for not going to a hospital when you wake up. Saying that, she walked to her wardrobe and brought out a blanket. As Mia was spreading the blanket on the floor, her eyes fell on the guitar case he had brought along with him. What was in that guitar case? Could it be that he was carrying something illegal in a guitar case and was followed by the cops and was shot? Okay, not again with the assumptions. However, her curiosity got the best of her. Mia crawled towards the guitar case. She picked it up and felt it was a bit heavy. What was inside? She was sure Mr. Ice Cube wasn't the kind to play any instruments. Nonetheless, when she unzipped the case, she was astonished to find a brand new, shiny brown classic guitar. And when she saw the logo of the brand on it, her eyes widened. Harmony Lux Virtuoso, she mumbled as she recognized the brand as one of the most expensive guitar brands known around the world. She had only seen them on TV and never came close to touching any of those guitars. Knowing how expensive it was, Mia gently zipped the case back and placed it back where she took it from. He must have gotten the guitar for someone, as she was sure he wasn't the kind to play it. And she wouldn't want to be caught touching something that she could never afford, even if she were to sell herself. As she placed the guitar down, she felt her heart sink as she realized how much she missed playing her favorite instrument. She couldn't help but feel a sense of envy for whoever he brought that guitar for. What a lucky person, she thought, as she backed away from the guitar and laid down on the spread blanket. It was already 4 a.m. in the morning. She needed to get some sleep. And due to how exhausted she was, Mia fell asleep within seconds of laying down. Neil woke up to a delicious smell filling the air. When he opened his stiffened eyes, the bright midday light streamed through the window, making him squint to adjust to the brightness. He didn't know for how long he had slept, but his entire body was aching from sleeping on a bed that barely contained his height. As he moved his arm, he felt something soft against it, and when he looked down, he saw a white, fluffy cat sleeping peacefully on top of his arm. Not a fan of cats, Neil frowned in displeasure and quickly pushed it away. Because of the small bed, the cat landed on the floor with a soft thud, meowing in protest and stretching its neck to look up at the man who had dared push him from its master's bed. Neil glared at the cat as it climbed up to the bed again, and without hesitation, he pushed it back down. "Stay the FK away from me, kitty," he warned the cat who was also glaring at him from the floor. Ignoring the cat, Neil looked around the unfamiliar room. He hadn't gotten to notice anything last night because of his bleeding wound, but now that he looked around the room, he noticed how simple and neat it was. At the far corner of the room, there was a reading desk with a small laptop on it, with scattered open books. Then on the other side, there was a purple wardrobe with little stickers glued to the doors. She seemed to like purple, Neil thought as he noticed most of the things in her room were purple. However, almost the entire walls of the room were covered with posters of actors and pop singers. His eyes slightly narrowed at the walls filled with posters. For some reason, he didn't like that the men in the posters were often shirtless or wearing only their boxers. How could someone sleep and wake up to a room filled with shirtless, half-naked men? Neil scoffed internally at her taste in men. The actor in the poster facing him was a drug addict in real life, and Neil had once gotten into a fight with the man when he was on a mission to investigate some drug dealers. He might look all built up and strong, but he hits like a sissy. And remembering him, Neil's lips twitched. Nonetheless, as Neil was reminiscing on how he had once beaten up the actor, the pleasant food scent reached his nostrils once more, and he realized that the girl who had helped him last night wasn't in the room with him. He finally looked away from the posters and glanced towards the window, where he had entered last night. Judging by the brightness of the day, he could tell that he had slept well past morning time. Neil muttered a curse as he attempted to sit up, but his head throbbed with pain when he tried to move. Despite the discomfort, he managed to force himself into an upright position and noticed that his limbs were trembling from the slightest movement. What was happening to him? Although his wound still caused some pain, it was a normal type of discomfort. However, the trembling of his bones was unexpected. As his head throbbed and his stomach churned, Neil suddenly remembered something. The neutrophil capsules he had been taking instead of eating had begun to show their side effects. He had been warned about these effects and had been advised not to take the pills every day, but to have a regular meal alongside them. However, he had always disregarded the instructions and taken the capsules according to his own preferences, instead of wasting time on a proper meal. The side effects included fatigue, shaky limbs, temporary loss of ability to walk, persistent headaches, and a craving for a normal meal. And at that moment, Neil was experiencing exactly that. Not to mention the searing pain from the wound on his side. Neil cursed again and rested his head against the headboard. Frustration clenched his jaw, and just then, the cat decided to jump onto his lap once more. "Damn you, kitty," he muttered, ready to fling the cat away. However, before he could do so, the door to the room opened, and Mia entered with a tray of food in her hands. Chapter 38 Simple Meal. Mia, who had just entered her room with the meal she had prepared for Mr. Ice Cube, was taken aback to see him awake and wearing an annoyed expression. Did he wake up in a bad mood? She wondered to herself. He appeared ready to explode as he stared down at something with a darkened look. She also glanced at what had captured his attention and realized it was her cat seeking comfort on his lap. Mia felt the urge to laugh at how he was glaring at her innocent cat as if the animal had done something wrong. She could guess that he wasn't fond of cats, and he confirmed it by shoving the cat off the bed. However, Robbie was a very stubborn cat who wouldn't give up easily when he wanted something, and right now he wanted to be beside Mr. Ice Cube. "Keep your damn kitty away from me," he growled through gritted teeth as he continued to glare at the cat attempting to climb back up. Neil had never been a fan of cats, even in his youth. He preferred dogs because they were more obedient and calm. He didn't despise cats, but he didn't appreciate them getting too close to him. Unfortunately, it seemed this cat was a persistent one who wasn't going to back down. Seeing the growing irritation on his face, Mia quickly walked into the room and locked the door behind her. She dropped the tray on the table and picked up her cat before Mr. Ice Cube would eat him raw with such a glare. She had woken up earlier than her uninvited guest, and because her mother had gone out to the eatery, Mia had taken the opportunity to cook something for him so he could eat when he woke up. Though she bet he wouldn't like what she made as it wasn't something a rich person would eat, she had still made it because his stomach had been growling the whole time she took to bath and changed her clothes. Didn't he eat last night? She had wondered when she heard how his stomach had been growling repeatedly. It was like his intestines were having a war in his stomach. And because she knew he might be hungry when he woke up, she had gone to the kitchen and made a simple meal. Neil, who had finally relaxed after the cat had been taken away from his side, glanced at the girl as she went to put the cat away on the other side of the room. He realized that she had freshened up and was now wearing a simple brown shirt and short black pants, which exposed her pale, smooth, and slender legs. Her brown hair was tied up in a messy bun. He couldn't help but notice her striking features. Her features, objectively speaking, were undoubtedly attractive even without any makeup. The symmetry of her face, the way her brown eyes sparkled as she glanced at the creature she put away, he thought she was the first woman he would agree was beautiful enough to make him stare more than he should. Neil also noticed that she was barefoot, and as he watched her feet, he subconsciously thought that they looked like a child's compared to his size 12 feet. However, he didn't show any expression that would reveal all those silly thoughts that went through his mind. He watched as she walked back towards him and picked up the tray she had brought to the room. Placing it beside him on the bed, she said, "Have something to eat before I check your wound for any signs of infection. Then you can leave," Mia thought in her mind, as she wasn't comfortable having to share her room with someone as intimidating as him. And besides, she didn't want the police to come knocking into their house searching for a criminal and finding him in her room. That wouldn't just cause a big scandal but also implicate her into something she wasn't aware about. Though for some reason, she believed in her heart that he wasn't a criminal. However, she also didn't want someone to find out a man had slept in her room. So it was best he leave before anyone knows. Neil, who was given the tray of food, arched a brow as he glanced down at the simple meal the girl had prepared. It was a hearty dish of rice porridge, seasoned with a mix of spices that filled the air with a comforting aroma. He frowned, his gaze shifting away from the food, unsure about consuming something so different from his accustomed meals. Though he rarely ate traditional meals, he hadn't tasted porridge since the death of his mother, who always made it for him whenever he was sick in childhood. Sensing his hesitation, Mia looked up from where she had went to sit down on her desk to do some of her assignments and met his eyes. "I know it's not what you're used to, but don't judge it by appearance alone. You need to eat," she said, her voice gentle yet firm, like a mother nagging her child to eat. Neil's expression twitched a bit. He didn't like it when anybody told him what to do, but for some reason, the concern in her eyes as she urged him to eat surprised him and amazed him at the same time. When was the last time someone urged him to eat for his own good? He couldn't even remember the last time he ate something made at home, because he didn't have a home but a house, a big empty mansion with no one to remind or urge him to eat. However, despite those thoughts, Neil remained skeptical as he continued to scrutinize the humble offering on his lap. Was he supposed to eat this simple-looking porridge or just order for something much better online? Mia, displeased with his apparent disdain for the food she made, spoke up again. "I didn't have much to work with, but it's good, I promise." Despite Mia's reassurance, Neil didn't make any attempt to pick up the spoon. The food didn't look all that bad. He just wasn't used to eating something as simple as a porridge. It had been a long time since he last ate porridge, and the thought of eating something that was last cooked for him by his late mother after such a long time made him reluctant as he didn't want to remember anything about her nor his life before. Mia, who misunderstood his reluctance to eat, didn't like how he regarded the food as if it were poison. She decided to speak again. "I get it. It's not a fancy meal, but it's nourishing. And right now, that's what you need, Mr. Bennett. But if you are not comfortable eating it, I will not force you and you can keep the food and find your way out of my room. However, make sure to leave when there is no one outside to see you come out of this apartment." Her words were cut off by the sound of his stomach growling loudly, drawing her attention down to his flattened, toned abs. Curiosity etched across her face as she asked, "When was the last time you ate?" She had noticed his stomach had been growling since this morning. A week ago, Neil thought, but he didn't say it out loud and ignored her completely as if she had not just been talking to him. He picked up the spoon and took a huge bite with his impassive expression. The flavors burst in his mouth, surprising him with their richness and warmth. His hunger, perhaps more intense than he realized, kicked in, and without caring that Mia was observing him, he started devouring the rest of the meal. The porridge, simple as it was, became a feast in his hungry state. He even drank the soup eagerly, savoring every sip. He would admit, the girl wasn't just intelligent but also knew how to cook. Neil wasn't the type to eat like this, but for the first time he ate something he quite enjoyed, or perhaps it was due to his hunger that made him feel like this was the best thing he had ever eaten in ages. In no less than 5 minutes, the bowl on his lap was empty. He then picked up the glass of water and drank from it, without a care where the water had came from like most rich people would care. Relieved to see him finally finished eating, Mia couldn't help but smile. "See, it wasn't so bad, right?" He hummed indifferently, hiding his enjoyment of the delicious porridge. He noticed Mia's disappointed expression at his cold response to her cooking. Her smile vanished as she got up and approached him to take the tray back. He didn't understand why he cared if she was upset or not. He wasn't usually concerned about people's emotions unless they affected him. However, he felt compelled to amend his words to make her feel better. "The food was good," he said flatly, but his sudden compliment seemed to stun her, and she spun around to face him. This time, her smile was even wider, accentuating the dimples on her cheeks. As he looked at her, her innocent smile reminded him of the little girl he used to protect when they were in Mirage Mesa. He would ride his bicycle all the way from his father's estate to the town fair just to get her favorite ice cream. But now, they were strangers to each other. She was no longer Mimi, and he was no longer Xavier. As Mia left the room and went to wash the plate, Neil looked around the room once again. This time he realized that Mia seemed to really fancy gray-eyed men, because all the men in the posters were gray-eyed, just like his own eyes. How strange, he thought, but then dismissed the thought as he began to think of how to leave when he couldn't move his limbs. He needed to have the military doctor look at his wound and give it proper treatment, but then to get out of here, he needed his legs to walk. And calling Liam to come over to get him would only bring more attention to him and the girl who had helped him. So technically he would be stuck here until he could move or wait until it was night when everyone were asleep and call Liam to come and get him. Normally, he wouldn't give a hoot about what anyone would say if they saw him coming out of the apartment. He was only being cautious because he was worried about his mission being jeopardized. For all he knows, the man who shot him lived around here, so he had to be extremely careful. Chapter 39, Dominating her room. Mia returned to her room after washing the plates he'd used to eat. When she entered, she found him trying to stand up from the bed, but he kept falling back onto the bed. He grimaced slightly and cursed, as if falling back had not just hurt his wound but his ego. And without looking at her, he growled, "Are you just going to stand there and watch me, or come over here and give me a hand?" Mia pursed her lips at his annoyed tone. It wasn't her fault that he couldn't stand on his own, and it seemed like he was forgetting that this was her room and not his office where he could command and speak to her the way he wanted. She had been happy earlier when he complimented her cooking with his lazy expression, which she had found adorable a while ago, but now his expression looked so annoyed and dark, like the world was owing him a huge sum of money. Couldn't he at least smile a bit or ask for something politely? It was either he had a scowl on his face or his expression was blank and indifferent. She couldn't help but wonder if a smile had ever graced those stoic features of his in this lifetime. Mia thought as she approached him on the bed. "Why are you trying to stand? Are you planning to leave?" she asked, but before he could reply, her eyes widened. "You can't leave right now. It's Saturday, and most of my neighbors are home. If you exit this apartment, then they will. I'm not leaving yet. I need to use your restroom," he interrupted bluntly, gazing up at her while she stood over him. Neil disliked it when people looked down on him. He preferred to be the one in control, the one standing over others. However, his trembling limbs prevented him from standing or even walking to the bathroom without assistance. Although he appreciated that the girl wasn't one of the military soldiers who would rub salt in his current inability to walk, he couldn't help growing annoyed with his vulnerable state. He was a soldier who instilled fear in people at the mere sight of him, and he liked it that way. He preferred to inspire fear and nervousness in others rather than be the weak one. Due to his frustration, Neil growled as Mia failed to move to assist him and continued to look down at him. "Would you like another sweet invitation before you decide to help me to your bathroom?" he asked sarcastically, glaring up at her with his silver eyes, eyes that normally caused soldiers to tremble and comply with his commands, fearing that he might strike them with his fist. However, the girl before him merely pursed her lips and huffed at him, crossing her arms over her chest. "Do you realize that you are the most arrogant man to ever grace this earth? Didn't your mother teach you to treat women with respect when requesting or needing something from them? You." Mia trailed off as she noticed his expression growing even darker than before. It was like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury upon the world. He looked so angry, his jaw clenched tightly, and his eyes bore into her as if he could tear her apart. When he spoke, Mia felt the urge to flee from the room. "If you ever mention a word about my mother's upbringing, I will cut out your tongue and feed it to you," he threatened darkly. Without waiting for her assistance, he forced himself off the bed, despite his shaky legs that threatened to give way beneath him. Neil walked into the bathroom and slammed the door shut behind him. Mia jumped at the sound of her bathroom door being slammed. She hadn't realized she had been holding her breath the whole time until he was inside the bathroom. She subconsciously pressed a hand to her beating heart and glanced at the door. What did she say about his mother to get him so annoyed? He seemed to care a lot about his mother to the point he got offended and even threatened to cut off her tongue. Mia swallowed hard. A moment ago he had been unable to stand up and walk, but because of his anger, he had walked steadily to the bathroom without her help. People like Mr. Ice Cube were the type to stay wary of. Their rage could lead them to do anything. And the fact that she had allowed someone like him into her room suddenly alarmed her. Last night when he was asleep, she had thought he looked harmless and couldn't be a criminal, but remembering that look he sent at her and his threat, she was beginning to doubt it. She would better stay out of his way until he would leave her room. However, it seemed staying out of his way wasn't for her to decide, because she heard his voice from behind the bathroom door, calling for her to come and assist him. Mia sighed. There was no doubt this man was bipolar. As Mia was busy dealing with Neil, completely forgetting she had planned an outing with Owen, Owen was busy preparing for his outing with Mia. He had saved some money with his part-time job in his university, and he planned to take her out to an expensive restaurant in the city. For years, he had been keeping his love for her in secret, but now he decided not to hide it anymore. He was tired of having to pretend like she was only his friend, and he was also fed up of having to scare off any man who seemed to have any interest in her. Though Mia didn't know about it, a lot of men in Whispering Way and even a few rich ones who had come across her, had grown interest in her. But because of him, none of them dared to approach her. He always had his way of scaring off people regardless of their class. He might not have been born with a golden spoon, but he was born with such intelligence that seemed to surprise him as well. Not just his intelligence, he had his ways to make them stay clear of his Mia. With a smile on his face, Owen styled his reddish-brown hair to the side in a classic manner. His deep blue eyes sparkled with excitement as he adjusted his well-fitted orange shirt and put on his boots. He had been looking forward to this day since when he'd asked her out. Furthermore, he planned to give her some of the money needed to pay the bank loan her mother had collected. "Owen, my son," slurred his drunken father's voice from the other room. But Owen ignored him as if he hadn't called out his name. His father was like a living ghost, who had no ambition in life other than alcohol. He had been like that ever since Owen's mother passed away years ago. And Owen had been the one to take the responsibility for both of them. He had to study and work together to feed them. Not once had his father ever stepped up to his responsibilities as a father or even attempted to ask Owen how he was coping in life. Owen knew what his father wanted for calling his name at this moment. Other than asking for money to buy another alcohol, there was no reason for him to remember he had a son in the house. Sometimes when people would even ask him about his son, Frederick Sullivan, his father would forget he had one and ask them, "Who is Owen?" Owen disregarded his father's call and grabbed his phone and wallet from his bed, placing them in his pocket. He then left the apartment, feeling content. Just as he was turning, he accidentally collided with Julie, who was preoccupied searching for something in her small purse. Julie appeared annoyed at being bumped into, but when she realized it was Owen, her expression brightened and she smiled. "Oh, it's you. Good afternoon, Owen. It's been a while since we last met. You must be busy with school, because I haven't been seeing you around," she remarked, taking note of his fashionable new outfit and stylish hair. He looked more attractive than she remembered. As Owen tried to walk around Julie, avoiding any conversation with her, Julie quickly stepped forward, blocking his path with a smile. "Hey, Owen, where are you off to? Mind if I tag along?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. She had liked him for a very long time, but he never gave her any chance to make her moves on him because his eyes were always on Mia. Owen, maintaining his uninterested demeanor so she would leave him alone, replied with a forced smile, "No, I'm going out with Mia." He declared deliberately so she would get the memo and not bother him again. Julie's expression soured at the mention of Mia's name, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. Though she had offered to be friends with Mia because she wanted to get introduced to the rich folks in Ivy Grove Institute, Julie had no intentions of becoming friends, and she hated it when Owen would look past her and be glued to Mia. "Oh, Mia? Huh? Well, have fun, you too," Julie said, her tone slightly mocking. However, she couldn't resist dropping a subtle hint about what she'd noticed in Mia last night. "You know, Owen, Mia had quite a night last night. Heard she had some company in her room, got a bit too cozy, if you catch my drift." She wiggled her brows. Owen, seemingly unfazed, raised an eyebrow. "Really? I don't keep tabs on her personal life," he said, but deep down he knew he was the master of keeping tabs on her personal life, and no man could pass to her room without his notice. Furthermore, Julie was the last person on earth who would tell him something and make him believe her. She was no different from her mother, Mrs. Dennis, who knew nothing but gossip around town about people, when in truth their own ways of living was something more to point fingers at. Julie leaned in, her voice low. "Well, you might want to. This isn't some rumor. I saw it myself, and she even came to my room last night to borrow a bottle of alcohol, and it seems she planned to get pretty drunk with her visitor. But hey, what do I know?" She gave him a sly smile and stepped back, as if innocently sharing some gossip. But knowing how protective Owen was of Mia, Julie was confident she had planted a seed of doubt in his heart about Mia. Owen, though skeptical, simply chuckled softly. "Watch how you speak about Mia's character. She's nothing like you, Julie, and if I hear you spread this nonsense about her, you will have to face me," he said, his tone carrying a hint of threat. He continued on his way, leaving the stunned Julie behind. As he walked into the Harrison apartment room, Julie couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and frustration, wondering if her words would have any impact on Owen's perception of Mia. She hoped he would walk into the room and find Mia with her visitor, as she hadn't noticed any man come out of that apartment room the whole morning where she had been keeping an eye on it. Chapter 40. Disturbing their afternoon. Mia helped Neil back to the bed after he was done with his business in the bathroom. She helped him lie back down on the bed with so much effort, and when he laid down, he couldn't even raise his own legs up to the bed until she helped him. He had called her into the bathroom when he couldn't seem to walk on his own again. She had been surprised to find him sitting on the closed toilet bowl as if he had lost his balance and fell on it. He was clutching his head between his hands, and hearing her open the bathroom door, he had spoken without looking at her, "Assist me back to the room," he said calmly, his tone blank with no emotions. Mia couldn't help but want to laugh at his state. He had surely been angry at her a moment ago and stubbornly walked on his own, but now he seemed too weak to walk back on his own. If he wasn't so intimidating and overwhelming, she would have refused to his face and even made fun of him, but she wasn't ready to lose her tongue. However, Mia couldn't help but also ask him, "Is it because of your wound that's made you unable to walk properly?" His eyes bore into hers. Nonetheless, instead of the anger she expected to find, he calmly replied, "No." Without giving any further explanation to her. Though she was curious to know what was wrong with his limbs, she dared not ask him in fear of seeing his rage. Mia slowly backed away and sat on the sofa beside her window. She looked down at the busy street of Whispering Way, where everyone was going about their weekend. Children were playing at the side, with the adults and teenagers sitting in groups. Normally, she would have gone to her mother's eatery to assist her on the weekends, but she couldn't possibly leave Mr. Ice Cube alone in her room in his condition. "You didn't tell me how you got shot last night, Mr. Bennett," Mia said as she turned away from the window to glance at him on the bed. She had the right to know what happened last night because he had come to her instead of going to a hospital to get proper treatment. She wanted to know if he was a criminal wanted by the authorities so she could prepare herself for what was to come in the future if the authorities found out she had allowed him into her house without reporting it. Neil, who was thinking about how to get himself out of here to get the military doctor to nurse him back to health, was amazed to hear her question. He turned away from the ceiling and looked at her. He noticed how she sat down on the small sofa with her knees pulled against her chest and her arms wrapped around them. She was staring at him with what looked like curious, wary brown eyes. He had thought she wouldn't ask him that question. After all, she hadn't seemed to be wary of him until he had lost his temper earlier and threatened to cut off her tongue. And now that she had decided to ask, he didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell her his identity no matter what. It was the most important protocol for all the undercover soldiers to remain unknown to every person except their subordinates in the military who knew about their mission. His mission was too important to be messed with by revealing his identity to someone outside the military. Furthermore, his identity as Neil Weiner was something he would forever keep a secret until the day he died. "I was attacked and shot by some men who stole my motorcycle," he lied nonchalantly. It wasn't a complete lie. His favorite motorcycle had indeed been stolen by some unknown person. He had spent a fortune to get that bike, but now he had to go through the trouble to buy another one. Even though he still had several brand new cars, some he'd bought with his own money and some given to him as a gift by many of the people he had helped, lined up in his mansion garage, he wasn't that fond of driving cars. He liked to ride motorcycles more than he liked cars. He would only drive on a formal occasion where he had to take fake identities. And remembering the trouble he went through before getting one of the limited edition motorcycles, Neil felt his blood boil with anger. Mia, who noticed his darkened expression, swallowed hard. Why does he always get angry like some old bull? She shifted on the sofa before speaking again. Then why didn't you report your stolen bike to the authorities or even go to a hospital to treat your wound? She asked curiously. Since he wasn't a criminal and was a victim of robbery, there was no harm in going to the authorities unless he was hiding something else. The authorities can't be of any help to my case, he replied curtly. And before Mia could speak again, there was a knock on her room's door, followed by Owen's voice. "Hey, Mia, can I come in?" he asked, but he was already turning the doorknob even before she could answer. Thankfully, Mia had locked it from the inside. Mia quickly jumped down the sofa and pressed a finger to her lips, signaling Neil to stay quiet as she noticed he wanted to speak. He frowned at her but didn't say anything and watched as she walked towards the door and said, "Owen, what's up?" she asked without opening the door. Owen, who was outside her room's door, frowned at the fact that she wasn't opening the door for him to enter, not to mention she seemed to have forgotten their plan to go out today. Are you ready yet? It's already way past 2 p.m. We have to leave to catch the train on time," he reminded. Mia's eyes widened at his words. She had completely forgotten she'd even made plans to go out with him. She had been busy the whole night taking care of Mr. Ice Cube to think about their outing to the city fair. It seemed they would have to reschedule until next week because she couldn't possibly leave her guest behind in the house. What if her mother returned and found a man in her room? Or what if he needed her assistance? Furthermore, her outing with Owen wasn't that important. Rescheduling it wouldn't cause any harm. Mia thought. She then said, "Owen, I'm not really feeling that good today, and I have a lot of research to do for my upcoming test. I think we should reschedule it for next week." Owen frowned in concern upon hearing she wasn't feeling well. "What's wrong with you? Open the door so I can take a look at you," he said, trying to turn the doorknob again. "Mia, are you sick?" he asked in worry, as he knew she liked to lock herself in the room whenever she was sick just to keep him and her mother from worrying. No, I'm not sick. I am just feeling a bit under the weather, but I'll be fine after a short nap," she lied. If she told him she was sick, he would insist on coming in and checking on her, but the last thing she wanted was for Owen to see that she'd let a man into her room. "Mia, open the door. I have to make sure you are fine," came Owen's serious voice from behind the door. And hearing how persistent he was in entering the room, Neil couldn't help the displeased frown that settled on his face. Who was this guy and why was he insisting on entering her room? Couldn't he get the memo that she didn't want him to enter, or did he want to be told plainly to the face that he should get the fuck away from the damned door and stop disturbing people's afternoon? Because if he didn't leave, he would be forced to tell him to FK off. Neil thought as he glared at the door, where Mia was standing. "Owen, I said I'm fine, really. Don't worry, it's just the days of looking for a part-time job that's taking its toll on me now," she said to Owen. However, Neil's eyes moved to her upon hearing she had been looking for a part-time job, but then he still didn't speak as he knew the girl wouldn't want him to reveal his presence to the person outside the door, even though he was itching to do just that if the man didn't get the memo to leave. Owen, who was behind the door, didn't seem to buy her words, especially after his encounter with Julie. Did his Mia really have a man over last night? No, she wouldn't. He knew her so well. She had never shown any interest in any other males apart from him and all those gray-eyed movie stars in the posters hung in her room's walls. She was so innocent. She hadn't dated any man through all her years in high school. And as long as he was alive, she would only date him and be with him. He wouldn't lose her, because she was the only light left in his darkened life. He trusted that Mia would never betray his trust, thus he smiled and said, "All right. I will check on you later tonight, take care of yourself. And if you need any company, you can always call me, okay?" he asked. "Okay, thanks for understanding," she responded. But Mia didn't step away from the door until she heard Owen close the front door. Letting out a sigh of relief, she made her way back to the sofa. "Was that your boyfriend?" Neil's cold and detached voice came from the bed. Mia quickly shook her head. "No, Owen isn't my boyfriend. He's just my childhood best friend. We grew up together," she explained. She couldn't imagine dating someone she saw as an older brother. Owen was more like the older brother she never had. Neil scowled at the mention of a childhood best friend. For some reason, he didn't like the fact that she had forgotten about their childhood relationship and had moved on to form another close bond with another man, who seemed overly protective for a friend. He didn't like the other guy at all, even though he hadn't seen his face. And he found himself asking before he could stop himself, "How old were you when you first became friends with him?"